all I want is all you are. Will you meet me here again? Yes, that's our cry this morning, oh God. Will you come and meet with us in this place? God, wherever we are, in our living rooms, kitchen, bedroom, God, wherever we are, God, I just pray that you come and meet with us. Lord, that we would be able to be transformed to be more like you. God, that you give us strength when we don't have it, peace when we don't have it. But God, above all, that you would just be glorified on our lives. In Jesus' mighty name, amen.
Hey, good morning, Branches. While most of us who claim to be Jesus followers would call ourselves Christians, the term Christian only appears in the Bible 3 times, and it was never used by Jesus followers to talk about themselves. Today, the definition of Christian is so unclear, we can spend our whole lives trying to be labeled as a Christian and completely miss what it means to live like a disciple. For some of us, we may need to quit being Christian and start being a disciple. Welcome to week 2 of Stop Being Such a Christian.
Last week, we started a conversation around the label of Christian and what it means to be a Christian and how that may not be such a positive thing. In fact, if you were to ask 500 people the same question, you would get 1,000 different answers of what does it mean to be a Christian, and you're probably not surprised by that. I want to remind you that Christian as a term was actually coined early in the 1st century by people who were outside of the group. They used it as a demeaning or derogatory term that meant little Christ or little Jesuses. And you can think of a clown car and how that car is silly because it's little. It's that same meaning with that term of Christian, where it wasn't a positive thing. And no early church goer would have thought to themselves, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, and they would be happy about that. And yet today, we look at Christian, the label, the brand of Christian, and it can mean just about anything. You can justify just about anything with it. In fact, if you look out right now, you might see people justifying bigotry or hate or the division of families and the social structure of the world just because they're Christian. Now, I see just as many people doing negative things as I see them doing positive things in the name of Christian or not Christian. And I often wonder to myself, well, if they look just like everyone else, if I look just like everyone else, then what's the difference? And if there is no difference between a Christian and a non-Christian, then what's the point? What's the point of the label and the brand? But it's important for us to remember that that was not the point. The label, the brand, Christian, was never the point of this whole thing. The point was to be a disciple. And that's what the early church called themselves. They called themselves disciples of Christ. They called themselves followers of Jesus. And the whole reason that they did that was because that's what Jesus called them. Now, disciple, unlike Christian, is incredibly well defined. In fact, John, the early church father, a great friend of Jesus who actually walked and did life with him, records it in his gospel. And he says, he wrote down the words of Jesus. And Jesus says this. He says, by this, everyone will know you are my disciples. There's that word. If you love one another. We can actually flip this around and make it a little bit easier to read in a modern context. You can say, if you love one another, people will know that you are my disciple, that you are a follower of Jesus. It's by this clear definition that suddenly we understand, oh, this actually might be a little bit harder than just this amorphous idea, this brand of Christian. Jesus defined it so clearly that it's almost inescapable on whether or not you're doing it right or wrong. There is no ambiguity there. And yet today, we apply the term, the label, the brand Christian. I've been guilty of this, and I know many of you listening at home have as well. We tie our faith, our Christian brand, to our political view or the way that we vote. We try to justify the hate and the mistreatment, the violence that we have against people with this label. In fact, that same label we use to apply to ourselves to make ourselves feel like we're better than someone, better than anyone, or better than everyone. If that's Christian to you, if that's the label, the brand that you've been adhering to and you've used it to justify or you want to use it to justify anything that is against this idea of loving one another, it's okay to quit that. In fact, if you look at Christians and you thought to yourself, I'm going to quit that because I don't want to be like that, you have permission. In fact, I would encourage you to do so. In fact, you would be joining great company because many people have been moving away from the idea of Christian, have been moving away from those who call themselves Christians because they look at that label, they look at that brand, and they think, I want no part of that. In fact, across all demographics, all social classes, all stripes of people, you will find them considering themselves non-affiliated. They would rather take the risk, take the chance of not being affiliated with Christian than to ever have the risk of putting that label upon themselves. But Christian, again, was not the point. Christianity was never supposed to be about a label or a brand or ever going to be tied to things of this world, whether it's political views or any of the negative things like the hatred and the violence. Instead, what we were called to do was to be a disciple. And a disciple is to emulate Jesus, somebody who's supposed to be like Jesus, to live like Jesus. What did Jesus do? Jesus put others first. In fact, he did so unto death. Jesus put everybody ahead of himself. In fact, he went the extra mile. It was a sacrificial love. And it didn't matter what skin color they had. It didn't matter what history of decisions they had had. It didn't matter his opinion of them or their opinion of him. And in much the same way, we're called to do the same thing. Now, 55 years after Jesus uttered those words to his followers where he said and defined disciple, we have John, the Apostle John, the same author who wrote that gospel, writing a letter to the church. And he's now 93 years old, and he's seen a lot. And he reiterates and solidifies this with this letter to the Christians. And he starts it off like this. He says, "Dear friends." Now, I love this statement because John is known as the apostle of love. And so when you see and hear the word friends from John, you know, you can kind of picture this congenial old man. I get a little twinkle in my eye from like this idea of a Santa Claus figure. I don't know why. But he's got this dear friends, this beloved, dear ones. So you know that even though he doesn't physically know you yet, if he did get a chance, you would be best friends. He says, "Let us love one another, for love comes from God." This is great. He's expanding and he's continuing this conversation about love and about what it means to be a disciple. And he continues and he says, "Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God." That's pretty great. "Whoever does not love does not know God." Well, John, why is that? Why is it that love is so intricately tied with knowing and being from and relating to God? Well, he says it's because God is love. This is an incredible statement. In fact, if you were sitting in his study while he's penning or dictating this letter to the church, you would be forgiven for suddenly just jumping out of your chair and saying to John, "John, have you forgotten what's going on outside? How can you say that God is love? There's so much violence, there's so much hate, there's so much pain." In fact, in John's own era, the Roman Empire was on the decline. There was political unrest, there was civil disobedience going on left and right, and there was slavery. It was a cornerstone piece of the economy. And in John's own personal life, he had witnessed or heard about and missed his friends who had been murdered and executed by the very same empire that had imprisoned him, banished him. In fact, that same empire, 20 years before he wrote this letter, had gone in and laid siege to Jerusalem. And once they finally got in, they killed and enslaved tens of thousands of people. And as they were ransacking and rampaging their way through the city, they finally got to the temple. And their rage didn't stop there. They instead tore down that temple, leaving no stone on top of another. And that was the destruction of the cultural and the spiritual identity of many Jewish believers. And John was a Jew. And in the midst of this pain and in this lifetime of persecution and hardship, John has the audacity to say, God is love. And yet, he would stand by that. He would stand by that so much that in all of his writings, he repeats this theme over and over again, that not only is God love, but that love is the most important thing. That it is the very reason that we are to interact with each other. It's the whole point behind discipleship. But it's fair to ask, and I would ask the same question, John, how can you believe that? How can you continue to believe that despite everything that you, in fact, in spite of everything that you've seen and done? How can you believe that? How can you believe that God is love? I get behind the idea that as a disciple we're called to love, but how are you able to believe that? And John would actually answer that for us. He continues, he says, "This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world, that we might live through him." Now this is incredible because it's a recurring theme for him, where he goes, you may have seen it in John 3:16, where he talks about, for God so loved the world, he sent his one and only Son down to lay down his life for us. And so John never recants that statement. In fact, he doubles down on it. And he says to these later in his life Christians, where he's trying to encourage them, he's telling them, you know what? I still believe this. Despite everything I've seen, I still believe that God sent down his Son to die for us. And this is why I know that's love. And so he goes and he defines that for us. He says, "This is love. Not that we loved God, Because again, it was not the action that we took that was important. It was actually the action that God took by sending his son down. But that he loved us and sent his son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Now I want to point out this us and our. When you're reading this, it's tempting just to think, oh, well, God sent his son down for me. And that's a totally fair way to read that. In fact, you might be forgiven for thinking that it's only about you. But the reality is that when we see this us and our, what this means is that there is no one that you will ever meet in any place at any time in your life who Jesus did not die for. You'll never come face to face. You'll never smell the breath of anybody that Jesus did not die for. This statement, this is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved everyone. And he sent his son as an atoning sacrifice for everyone's sins. And so John continues, and he has that wonderful greeting. I love it. He says, "Dear friends, dear ones, beloved, since God so loved us," again, this is that same everyone that you'll ever meet that Jesus died for, us, "we also ought to love one another." This is a fantastic statement because this sums up and wraps up everything that it means to be a disciple, the reason behind doing it. We've received this great gift from God where he has sent his son, and he's done it because he loves us. And now John has pointed out, he said, ought to love one another. Now, ought in a Greek context means a financial indebtedness. It means that you've been given something, and so you have a debt to somebody else. But as a modern reader, I think it's safe for us to say that we can say ought is an appropriate response for everything that God has done for me, for everything that God has done for you. An appropriate response to that is to love one another. An appropriate response to everything that's happened that God has done for us, we ought to love one another. We ought to love the us and the our that Jesus came and died for. And that's everybody. Now, if your experience with Christian looks nothing like that, if your experience with the brand, the label, the idea of Christianity looks nothing like love and forgiveness and just peace and kindness with others, you have permission to quit that. It's okay to quit that. You get to make room for understanding. You get to make room for care. You get to love people who are different than you, whether it's their race or their job, their social position, or the decisions they've made in the past. You now have room to do that. By quitting the brand, the label that may be sending you into judgment or hate, you now have room to move into love and care and kindness for those that you may not normally have done. And Jesus set the example, and John set the example, and the early church set an example for us. So we know it's possible, and I think it's something that we can do. But first, we've got to stop being Christian, and we need to start being a disciple. We'll see you next week, Branches. But first, stay tuned for Talking Branches with Daniel and Timmy.
Welcome to Talking Branches. How you doing, Daniel?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing all right.
How was your fourth?
I was going to ask you that.
Oh, I beat you to it.
Put me on the spot. This is my show, my interview.
You ask the questions. I will keep my mouth shut.
More important question.
Yeah.
Do you like my beard?
Do I have to be honest? Yes, I do. I'm a pastor.
Yes.
I'm
cannot
not
lie.
sure yet.
Okay.
It's the jury's still out.
Did you say, is
it's
it growing on you?
It's
Because it's growing on me.
It's growing on you. Oh my God.
Dad jokes. All right. My wife hates it. So if you guys want to chime in, actually Talking Branches is your time to ask questions. So we don't always get questions from you guys, but on your various platforms, I know we're having some technical issues this morning. So wherever you're at any week, shoot us questions in the comments.
Yep.
And we will try our best to answer them, which is kind of fun.
It is.
And
you just invited them to ask challenging questions.
yeah, that's good. And you can comment on whether or not the beard should stay, because my wife hates it, and I'm always looking for ways to keep it, so I need more of you.
I think it's the handlebars. I'm not sure.
You don't
about.
like this?
Yeah,
I thought it was patriotic or something.
Didn't your
I don't
grandpa
know.
have like world record handlebars or something?
Yeah, he did something for the what was it, the 1976 200-year
I mean, I don't remember
birthday of America. I was not there.
Okay.
I was not present for that.
Yeah.
And he grew like a super long handlebar mustache, and
That's good.
I'm probably not going to get there.
I don't
but
think so
We'll
either.
see.
I hope-
Enough about my beard.
Yeah.
How was your fourth?
Let's move on. It was great. It was
Okay.
awesome. Super exciting.
Mine was too.
Yeah.
Lost a cornhole tournament pretty fast.
I burned my finger.
You got to be careful, man.
You got to be careful.
Got to be
Safety
careful.
first.
Hey, so we're in this series, Stop Being Such a Christian, which is kind
Yes.
of a evocative,
It is.
purposefully evocative title for a series.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I think don't hear what we're not saying. We're not saying don't be Christian. We're saying let's redefine or remember what it really means to follow Jesus. It's not just an association or an affiliation label. We're not just being associated with an idea. We're actually saying, when we're saying, I want to follow Jesus, we're saying, my life's been changed. It's been transformed. My thinking is different than it was. I was dead in my sin, and now I'm alive in Christ, which means there's a transformation that happens. It's really, it's saying no to just being affiliated with something and saying yes to following the teachings and the principles of Jesus and allowing the Holy Spirit to do a work in our hearts. And so I think that's really important to know. You know, it's not that we should never use the title Christian again. It's just a reminder for those of us who have been Christians for a very long time, who we're really supposed to be and what it really means to follow Jesus. It's so much more than, you know, a box you check for your religious affiliation. It's a lot more than that. It has to do with how we live, how we speak to each other, the convictions we hold, and the decisions we make.
Right.
That it's so much more than that. And if Christianity for you has been more of an affiliation or an association, giving you permission to quit that and actually become a disciple of Christ, which is a lifelong journey and process that we're all on.
Yeah.
So
when we say stop being a Christian or quit being a Christian or whatever, that's kind of what you mean.
yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about through the course of this series. Is let's stop just being affiliated,
Yeah.
and let's do something that's transformational in our life as well as the lives of the people who are doing life all around us.
Yeah.
So
I think that's vital too. I mean, in so many areas of life, for us it's our tendency to get caught up in culture, whatever's going on around us in our nation, where we live, our family, or whatever it is, and kind of lose sight of like why we believe what we believe and how, looking at our faith through the lens of everything we've experienced and everything we've done, everything we've seen. Not looking at our faith through that, but actually looking at it the way Christ tells us to look at it.
I think
it gets muddled and it gets confused a little bit.
Well, I think it's the wrestle between being eternally focused and temporarily focused. Everything that's temporary, it's right in our face. We see it, we touch it, we feel it, we smell it. And that's temporary. It's only for a short time. We miss the fact that there's eternity at play all the time, which is forever and is the part of life that really, really matters.
Sure. And I think we look back through history too. I mean, I'm speaking next week and I don't want to give too much away because it's really, really, really cool.
It's going to be great.
It's going to be so good.
So good.
But the best. No, not the best, but good. Anyway.
It'll be good.
It'll be good. All right. But throughout history, really through, since the beginning of the Christian faith, really, we've seen instances of faith being leveraged for things that really were contrary to the goal of Christianity in the first place.
Right.
Things that aren't love, things that are far from love. I mean, you look at the Crusades and even how you look back to when Christianity became the main religion of the Roman Empire, like in the 300 AD or so. They began leveraging things other than love to kind of impose their will, their morals, their values on people around them who didn't claim to be Christians, which kind of puts a bad taste in the world's eyes,
I don't know if this is where we're going, but I think a theocracy is dangerous. A government system that's governed by a religion specifically. Every time you look in history, you see tons of what you're talking about.
So you hate America?
Where faith, America's not a theocracy.
Sorry. Some people's minds probably went there, so I just want to make sure to clarify.
I think it's incredible that we have religious freedom in this country to be able to do what we're doing, and that's part of why I celebrate and why I think a lot of us celebrate our country's freedom and independence, because we have the ability to exercise our freedoms, which gives all people that freedom and that right, but we have it as well. To be able to broadcast this right now is a freedom that there's still countries in the world that don't have this freedom.
Right.
They've got to hide. They've got to hide their faith. But when you give absolute power to one religion, that also ends up corrupting. You see people leveraging faith for things that are even contradictory to the very faith they're leveraging.
Right.
And that's dangerous. And that brings us back. The problem that we see all over right now, when we look at all the unrest and all of the arguments and all of the conversations about right or wrong, what we're talking about is the brokenness of humanity. And the only solution is Jesus. The only solution is for the church to be the church, for us to stop being Christian and to start being disciples. That will change the world. That will change society. That will change individuals and entire people groups, because it's an eternal power. It's the power of Jesus Christ who does love unconditionally. That's the only way it'll happen.
Yeah. So the series really is about kind of getting back to the roots of what the Christian faith is supposed to be seeing. And I think the nice part about that is refreshing, because we look to books and we'll read entire books on how to handle certain situations, and really it's like it's so much more simple than we've made it, I feel like, in a lot of Christian culture, where it really does go back to, okay, we got to treat everybody with love, and by that, they will know that we are disciples of Christ.
Which love is, and I've stolen this phrase and used it over and over and over from a friend of ours, actually. The opposite of love is not hate, it's neglect.
Yeah.
Love includes truth. We're going to talk about that in this series in a few weeks, but love includes telling people the truth, and sometimes that's hard. You and I have done that to each other multiple times, where you're correcting me and I'm correcting you, and that's loving. It doesn't mean we avoid the issue. It means we approach the issue in a way, this comes back to our temperaments thing that we're actually walking a few people through, to approach sharing truth in a way that the person you're talking to would be able to hear it. Doesn't mean you avoid it. And you see Jesus do it all the time. He comes and says, hey, you're messing up. This isn't God's best for you, but you're forgiven. Now go and live differently because of that forgiveness. So I think that's important too. When we talk about love, we're not talking about just being nice. We're not talking about avoiding truth, because if you avoid truth, that's a lie, and lying isn't loving. So it includes all of that.
I remember probably our first or second one-on-one meeting with you stepping up as a head pastor here. You came to me and said something. You were kind of beating around the bush about like giving me feedback on my messages or how I was doing as a leader in youth. And I'm like, Daniel, you just need to give it to me straight. Like, I don't need the fluff.
You don't need the love sandwich.
I don't need the love sandwich. Just give it to me like all straight, all truth. Like, you don't have to butter me up. Just give it to me. And I appreciate that about you, because then you're able to say, hey, because I feel like the tendency for a long time with a lot of leaders to speak into people that are serving under them, to go in and not say certain things that will, in effect, make them better, because they want to preserve their feelings.
Conflict,
they're avoiding conflicts. They want to preserve their feelings. But really, I told you, I gave you permission to do this, so I wouldn't recommend you just do this to everybody.
Right.
Most people need the love sandwich.
Yeah.
But I gave you permission to basically just speak the truth in love, and just let me know what I need to do to improve, because that's what I want to do. And by you not telling me that, I'm not going to get any better. And so I appreciate that about our relationship.
And I think that applies to community, period. And community is such a big deal. In community, we need people around us, and this is all through Paul's letters. You can read it all over. We need accountability. We need people to say, hey, you shouldn't talk to your wife that way. Or, hey, how are your kids? One of them seems like they're struggling. Are you able, we need those conversations.
And you can see how those conversations can go awry, because if the wrong person, or they say it in the wrong way, I mean, that's like you're attacking me and my parenting or my, spousal relationship. And so it's almost like a two-way street. Like,
it is.
As Christians, we have to be willing to accept the truth in love, and then also have the right approach when we talk to others about it, which is difficult.
And I think too, you and I have been friends long enough that when I speak the truth, even if it's harsh, we have a relationship that's strong enough where we both trust that you have my best in mind and I have your best in mind, which allows us to speak truth to one another. And I think it's really easy for us to dismiss the work, the effort, the time, and the energy that it takes to build that relationship, that trust with someone, before we just go, "You're wrong." We start with the correction before there's relationship built, and I think it's so important that we do both, that we build that relationship and recognize, hey, until someone trusts us, until someone knows. You said this last week. Until someone knows how much we care, they're not going to care how much we know.
Right.
I think that's crucial for us as believers and as friends and as family members.
Yeah, and I really like that you brought up the temperament study. What do we call it here?
Growing your communication.
Growing your communication, which we're doing right now with a few people. So when you guys see that coming up in the future, because I think we're going to continue to do that at Branches, one of the most helpful things you can do, I was talking to a couple last week, just for your marriage, for your parenting, understand what your kids are like, what your spouse is like, and their communication styles. Man, it's been so beneficial for me as a leader. I mean, for in your workplace, wherever you're at, like, man, you can all of a sudden realize that people have different needs as far as communication goes and how to talk to them better. I mean, man, it saved me a lot of grief, especially because I'm a red who just goes in like bullheaded into all sorts of situations and says things. I mean, man, I've said a lot of stupid things, and you know that. You've been there for a lot of them.
I've heard them.
So you've heard them.
I've never said anything stupid.
Yeah,
ever.
I know. But you always apologize right away. That's right. You're yellow.
I
so
try to.
anyway.
Yeah.
So
What else
as
you got?
Christians, what are some practical ways we can begin shifting our brand? Because, man, I think, and we talked about it a little bit, love is obviously one of them, but I feel like to get that bad stigma of the word Christian out of, I guess, culture, like obviously that's a large task, the global church as a whole, but how can we, I mean, because just because it seems like a large task doesn't mean we shouldn't, seek to fix it.
Right.
How can we do that?
I think a lot of it really comes back to what, and this sounds, I mean, I hesitate to say it because it sounds simple and it's something we've said before, but I think we read the Bible all the time and it's the same book. And I think we still have a lot to learn as individuals and as the capital C global church. And I think it really comes back first to having Jesus be the source of our decisions, having Jesus and our relationship with him continue to grow, asking the Holy Spirit to really overwhelm our thoughts and overwhelm our hearts and to invade our space intentionally. Because if we can't see, this is, I think, the most crucial piece, if we don't recognize that the same grace and mercy that Jesus has extended to our brokenness, our individual brokenness, is the same grace and mercy he's calling us to extend and proclaim and shine light on for those that we do life around, for our family members that we have a hard time with, for our boss that maybe we can't stand, or that employee that just drives us insane. If we don't recognize that they're the same, they have the same intrinsic value because they're created in God's image that we have, we're never going to grasp what it means to live like disciples. And that will only happen as we understand and know who Jesus is and who we are because of who he is. The more that we recognize that, the more love and grace and mercy and truth and boldness that we're going to be able to live out in our everyday life. If we're not going back to the source, which is Jesus, which is the Holy Spirit, which is our Father in heaven, we're not going to be able to change that. And Christianity will be an affiliation to a group of people or a way of thinking politically, and it won't be a transformational lifestyle. And if it's not that, we're missing the boat. And we won't, it's not, our brand isn't going to be different. We'll still be known as judgmental. We'll still be known as hypocritical. So I think that is number one. We've got to continue to go back to the source. And I think number two, again, nothing new, is being around people intentionally. We've got a few people here in the room who are in small groups, and they've made a decision to put a time in their week on their calendar to spend time with other people who want to be disciples of Jesus, and they've given them permission to speak into their life. I don't think we I don't think we change the world. I don't think we change our branding. I don't think our personal lives are going to be transformed outside of going back to the source and being in community with other people who are going in the same direction. It won't happen.
Yeah.
I think right now we're seeing that a 1-hour Sunday morning service, it never satiated, it never satisfied that desire that we have to be connected to our Father in heaven. It never was enough, and it never will be enough. It's got to be us seeking Jesus on our own, and as small groups of people doing life together and serving others.
Right. It's easy to come in here on a Sunday morning. Well, not anymore, but
It's right.
hopefully again sometime.
Yeah.
But come in here, slip in and slip out, not really have a lot of connection, kind of do your weekly church duty.
And check the box.
Right, check the box. Whereas what you're talking about, getting in community with small groups or intensives, stuff like that is, I mean, I've been in small groups for years and years and years. It's so vital. There's nights when I don't get a lot out of it, but I'm like, I'm glad that I went to have that accountability, because you're not always there for you. You're there for other people who need you. And man, it allows for so much more growth. Like I can't even tell you like all the experiences that we've had in groups and the growth that has been seen there. I mean, we used to say that, church doesn't happen on Sunday morning, it happens in small groups.
It doesn't happen in rows, it happens in circles.
Exactly, and that's so vital. There's so many stories too about people that we've tried to get in small groups that are just like, hey, you know what, we're not ready, we're not in a place. You're always in a place, as long as you're able to make the time, or willing to make the time.
And when you need that community and you don't have it, you can't build it.
Yeah, it's so hard to build it.
It's not instantaneous.
So hard.
So
groups are great. So join a group, guys.
yeah.
I guess that's the biggest
Yep.
takeaway. So we have some discussion questions for you guys. For those of you who are in watch parties, we'd love for you guys to go over that, chat some more about what it's like to quit being a Christian and
start being a disciple.
So you can check those out. We'll leave them up on the screen for you guys. Other than that, we got how many more weeks of the series? Seven more weeks of the series.
7 more weeks.
It's going to be a good one.
It's going to be great.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
So that's all we got for you today. Branches, have a great week. We'll see you next week with me speaking on insiders versus outsiders and what that looks like. So have a great week, Branches.
Love you guys.